Good morning and Happy New Year to you. If you're watching and it's not the New Year, well, I hope you're doing well too. My name is Josh and I like to take photos. And today I'm going to show you how to edit this photo here, very gloomy and dark, just kind of depressing, to something like this, which is much brighter. I feel like the colors pop. It feels very like atmospheric. The fog is very accentuated. Um, yeah, I'm pretty excited to show you guys how I did this. I will say that this is simply a tutorial. It doesn't reflect my actual editing process. Usually I edit a photo, then end up coming back to the photo and tweak it here and there multiple times, like over and over and over again. And I'm usually jumping from adjustment to adjustment in no particular order. In this video, it's just going to be a streamlined process, just to make it easier for everybody to follow along. I've left a link in the description to the original raw photo for you to download. I know, very brave of me to do. That way you can follow along if you'd like. Obviously, this edit will be tailored to my own personal tastes, but please, if you're following along, feel free to experiment and have fun with the edit. Oh, also, to make it clear, I am not like the master of Lightroom or anything. I've been using it for a while now, but it's a very complicated and dense program, and there's still plenty of things I'm learning. So that being said, if you're watching and I've explained something poorly or inaccurately, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn from you and learn from any mistakes that I might potentially make. That aside, let's edit this photo. So we've got this raw, unedited photo. Where do we start? Well, we're actually going to start with the Optics tab located under the Edit panel. If we click on the Edit panel here, it's marked by these three lines with little dots on them. We can then open up the Optics tab here. First and foremost, we're going to enable lens corrections. With this, Lightroom will automatically select the lens used to take the photo, and it will get rid of the distortion as well as any vignetting that the lens has had an effect on. Lightroom is typically quite good at detecting what lens was used, but if it makes a mistake, you can manually select what lens it was. They have just a ton of different options. But it selected the lens correctly here, so that is good. So now let's look at these branches here in the top left corner. I'm going to hold Control and then click and drag, and it's going to zoom us in here. And we can see this kind of cyan and red colors here, kind of resembling like old 3D glasses. This is called fringing, and essentially it's caused when a lens can't focus all the color wavelengths of light into one spot. It's quite common, and it's also quite easy to fix. I will say Lightroom is a very powerful program, and it's very easy to overdo or push the settings too far. So be mindful of that when editing. I'll show you here with the defringe tool. Usually, when using the defringe tool, you can just use the color selector located here and click on your two colors, usually blue and red, or purple and green, located, as Lightroom is showing here, purple and green right now. But I can tell you from having already edited this photo that we're just going to have to do it manually. Lightroom wasn't quite getting it right when using the color selector. So if we click on purple here, we can just set the parameters to 79 to 95. So if we bring this here, we'll say like 79, bring this to 95. These are very specific parameters, but I'll show you why they're so specific in a moment. And we'll bring the amount up to 4. And just like that, we can see the red kind of disappear, kind of fade away. For the green value, we'll click over here. Let's just set the parameters to 54 and 74. So 74 here, 74 there, and we'll just bring it up to about 54. And we will also just set the amount to 4. There we go. And as we can see, most of it, not all of it, there's still some pixels here and there that are still colored that way, but it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. But most of the fringing is gone. So that's pretty much it for that. Like I said, it's easy to overdo it, so let's see what I mean. This is an extreme example, but here I've got the purple amount set to 20 and the hue, the parameters, set from 79 to 100. And if we zoom in over to these branches where we were looking earlier, we can see that, yeah, most of the fringing is gone. There's some blue there, but it's okay. It's not the biggest deal in the world. But the issue is that because these parameters are wrong and the amount is cranked up way too high, if I zoom in over here to this little patch of grass here, we may not see anything at first, right? But if I undo the defringe, we can see just how much of the grass here is being desaturated. See, this is with the fringing at 20. If I turn it off, there's no there's no desaturation here anymore. So you really want to be careful and use this stuff in moderation. Otherwise, you're going to be affecting parts of your image that you wouldn't really want to be affecting. So just be careful with that and know that a little really does go a long way. So we've enabled lens corrections and we fixed the fringing. Now what? Well, we can close the optics tab for now and we will actually open up the light tab. Usually, most people's first instinct is go for exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, all these sliders here. I'm actually going to go to the tone curve first. Let's place a couple of nodes along the tone curve, just here and here. Honestly, I'm going to move this one over here. And we're going to make like just a slight S curve. So that means we'll bring this node down. I'll bring this one up a little bit, creating an S almost, you know? And then I will add an additional point here and bring this down just the slightest bit to make it a bit more punchier. And I will bring this up, this one here. And as you can see, when I bring it up, it creates like a faded effect. Obviously, this is too much for my liking. So instead, I'm just going to bring it up just the slightest here. The photo is still quite dark for my liking, so we are going to bring the exposure up just a tad, probably around plus 20, plus 30, around there, or plus 0.20, plus 0.30, you know, nothing too crazy. Kind of like it there. And we can also just bring up the shadows a bit, really try and pull more detail out of this foreground here. Probably also just about plus 20, you know, nothing too crazy. That's good. And we will also increase the contrast just to plus 20 as well. You know, I might actually just bring the shadows up a bit more. And then the blacks we will also just, you know, bring down a little bit. Probably, yeah, that's pretty good there. And if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, we can actually see a before and after of what we're doing. So backslash before, after, very minor stuff, nothing too crazy yet, but in the long run, once we get everything done here, you will see that these all have a tremendous effect on the photo. Okay, so the colors are still looking very dull, you know, so we're going to minimize the light panel there and open up the color panel. And we can see all these crazy options. Oh, we're just going to work with white balance right now, and we'll move our way through. Just because this is a raw photo, we're actually able to adjust the white balance just directly. This is the white balance that it was set to when it was shot, and we can change that, make it warmer, make it colder, you know, make it, introduce some green tint, introduce some purple tint, all that fun stuff. I'm just going to double click on the nodes here to reset the sliders. So if like I drag it here and I realize I'm not a fan of that and I want to set it back to what it was originally, I'll just double click on that and there we go. For me personally, the colors are probably just a little cold for what I want. So let's just drag the temperature slider probably somewhere around like 62, 6300. I think that's probably pretty good there for now. And we can also, I really want the greens to pop in this image. So we can bring the tint just towards the green a little bit more. Not a ton though. Again, with most everything, a little goes a long way. Probably like right there is good. Plus 7 instead of the plus 18. All right, now that we've done that, let's move on to the color mixer right here, or also commonly known as the HSL sliders or hue, saturation, luminance sliders. This lets us adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance of specific colors within the photograph. So if we, let's say we select the orange here and we drag the hue to the left, we'll see that all these oranges, especially down here in the grass here, gets brought to this sort of red color, whereas if we bring it this way, it brings it more to a yellow. But for extreme purposes, let's say we bring it all the way to red, and then we can also increase or decrease the saturation of these. We'll actually just zoom in here so we can see it a little bit better in action. Just sort of decrease the saturation, increase it. But yeah, anywho, for what we're going to do with this photo, we actually are just going to bring it a tad bit towards red, nothing too far. That's probably good. And we'll set the saturation. We're just going to saturate it just a little bit, probably like, there we go, plus 6, you know, nothing too crazy. So for the yellows, we actually are going to drag them more towards green, probably like plus 50 is good there. It is a little saturated, like for my liking, like these yellows here. So we are also going to desaturate it a little bit, probably a fair amount actually, probably like around -40 is pretty good. Now we'll go to the greens here, and for this we are also going to bring them to the right, bring that slider to the right, kind of bring them to more of a teal color. And we're also going to desaturate the greens to about like -30, not too far and not as far as the yellow, but still. There we go. We have now we've done everything for this photo. We've done everything we want to do with the hue, saturation, and luminance under the color mixer. All right, on to color grading. Color grading in Lightroom is split up into 3 sections. You have your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. Usually it's shown here. I like to work under each specific tab. This essentially lets us manipulate the hue, saturation, and luminance of the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if I click on the shadows and I drag the saturation slider all the way to 100, we'll see that all the shadows in the photo turn this really bright red, because that's what the hue is set to. And you can change the hue here and it'll change the color as you want. There's also luminance, which brightens and darkens those specific values right here. And we also have the blending and balance sliders. And to show you what these do, let's do this. Keep the hue of the shadows to red, and we'll set the saturation to about 50 here. That's good. In the midtones, we'll set the hue to a more blue color, like right here is good, and we'll also set the saturation to 50. And for the highlights, we will bring it to a yellow color, and we'll set the saturation to, you guessed it, 50. Now, if we hold down the Alt key or Option key on Mac and drag the blending slider to the right, it does literally that. It blends all the colors together. Whereas while still holding Alt or Option, we drag it to the left, it does the opposite and it kind of separates the colors. And holding Alt just helps you visualize it more clearly. Letting go, you can still see it, but this gives you like a really exaggerated view just to help you visualize what it'll look like. And so like we can now see that the reds, the blues, and the yellows and the shadows, midtones, and highlights are all kind of separated. We can do the same with the balance slider here, holding down Alt, drag it to the right. We can see essentially what the balance slider does is it affects the bias of the tint essentially towards either highlights or shadows. So if we bring the balance to the right, the highlights are going to be more prominent and the color in the highlights will kind of take over. Whereas if we bring it to the left, the shadows will be more prominent and the color in the shadows will kind of take over. Now that we understand that, let's just reset everything we've done real quick. And we can actually color grade it the way we'd like to color grade it. We're simply going to bring the hue of the shadows to an orange color, probably about there, and just increase the saturation to around 15, 16, nothing too crazy. And then we'll also bring up the luminance a bit, kind of accentuate that faded look that I was talking about earlier with the S-curve here. This here, we're trying to do that as well in the color grading. In the midtones, we'll bring the hue to green and we'll just increase the saturation to around 11 or 12. Here to green. And as for the highlights, we're actually not going to touch it at all. And the blending, we can bring to about 70. And the balance, we're just also not going to touch, at least not for this photo. I think that's pretty good. That's really it for all we're going to do under the color tab. And we can hit that backslash again and see our before and after. These are coming along nicely. It's looking kind of flat. But don't worry, we're going to get into some tools here that'll help make this image look less flat. So we can close the color tab. We can go ahead and open up the effects tab. Now the effects tab seems pretty straightforward, and it kind of is, but the effects here, again, are very powerful. A little goes a long way. Like if I'm like, oh, I want this photo to look a lot clearer, like you'd think, oh, just crank up the clarity, and it's like, oh yeah, that looks great, but then like you'll come back in like 10 minutes and you'll realize, oh my god, this photo looks terrible. Why did I do that? Well, it's because you went crazy with the clarity. Now texture, clarity, and dehaze, vignette, and grain all do essentially what they say. Texture kind of brings out textures within the photo. Clarity will clarify the stuff in the image or make them, a bit foggier, a bit blurrier. Dehaze will get rid of haze or add haze to the photo. Vignette simply adds a vignette. You can actually drop down here and you can adjust all the vignette settings. For this photo, we're actually not going to be using vignette. And grain also adds grain. Who would have thought? But yeah, we're also not going to be bothering using grain for today. Usually a good rule of thumb is with texture, clarity, and dehaze, you actually want to adjust those locally. And what that means is using masking tools in specific areas in the photos where you want to either add or subtract texture, clarity, or dehaze. Now, while it is a good rule of thumb, like any rule in photography, just do what you want. It's meant to be broken. You don't have to follow that. And on that note, I actually really want to bring down the clarity, kind of give this photo a bit more of a dreamy look, about -60. That's a good spot. And I actually also want to dehaze it just a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but something that will just add and accentuate the fog. And we can see now, hitting backslash again, checking that before and after, things are kind of coming along quite nicely. And you can see the major differences already. I will also just bring up the texture a little bit in the overall image. I especially want to bring out the textures here in the grass, and we will cover that right now, actually. All right, so now we can move on to masking. And masking is probably Lightroom's most useful tool. You can get very detailed with it. You can get very creative with masking. I'm not really going to get into all the aspects of masking today. I'm just going to show you two very simple masks that we can use and are going to use. The first one is the radial gradient, and then the other one is the linear gradient. So the first one we're going to use is the radial gradient. We can click on that, and we'll just kind of go to the center of the image here, and we'll drag this out. We can see what's red is the part of the image that's going to be affected by the mask. So we'll drag this out, kind of make like a skinny circle. And we can see here up at the top, there's this option called feather that kind of smooths out the effects of the mask. So like if I crank this to 100, I just bring the exposure all the way down, we can see we have this nice smooth oval shape that kind of gets darker the closer to the center you get. But if I bring this all the way to 0, we can now see that it is a solid dark oval. We're going to bring the feather to about 70. And we'll reset the exposure, and we can just bring it up to about like 0.5 is pretty good. We'll bring the shadows up just a tad, like plus 15. We'll go down. I want this image to feel a little warmer and also still bring out even more green. So I'll increase the temperature a little bit, like plus 10. Bring the tint down probably like minus 10. And there we go. We've done that. And remember, I was talking about editing texture, clarity, and dehaze locally within masks. So as you can see, we can do that right here. So I'm actually going to kind of counteract a little bit of the negative clarity that we did. I'm just going to increase the clarity here a little bit. And that's really going to be it for the radial mask. The next mask that we're going to add is the linear mask. So we'll click the plus here, and we'll just select linear gradient. We can click and drag this, and once again we can see the red. If we drag this out, this is how we increase and decrease the feathering. Go from a solid line to something a lot smoother and more gradual. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of bring it, set it to about here. I'll bring this up a little bit. And all we're really going to do is just adjust the exposure. We're going to bring it down just a little bit, maybe about just like minus 0.2. And then we're also just going to increase the texture, try and bring out more of that texture within the grass and the leaves on the ground. That's really it for the linear gradient. And we can see here we can toggle the masking edits, see what those are like before, after, before, after. Cool. So now that we've done that, we are just going to make like a few more adjustments. Looking at this photo, I still think it's a little dull, so we can close out of masking and we can open up the edit tab. And if we go back under color, we're just going to bring up the vibrance a little bit. Not too much, like maybe just 0.2. There we go. That looks a little bit better. And then we're also just going to mess around a little bit with the tone curve again. I'm going to kind of bring this up like that, and then this one down a little bit, just make it a bit more punchier. Bring this here. Just bring the whites down just a tad. And I'd say that's pretty good. I think that's about where we want it. If we hit backslash, we can see that before and after. I'll show you how to export it. If we click File here, we can click Export, and then it'll just bring up the image, and we can choose what image type we want, and then we can export it full size, quality. We'll set it to 100. Down here, it'll show us just the size of the file. So it's going to be 21.6 megabytes. But yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something today. I really do. If you enjoyed, please let me know. Give the video a like, give it a comment. I'll respond to you. And that's really it. Thank you very much. You have a great day. Bye-bye.